Hello, and welcome to this episode of Smith's Got Talent, a podcast featuring students, faculty, and alumni of the University of Maryland Robert H. Smith School of Business, discussing how they've helped solve actual business challenges and leveraged AI and other tools to bring innovative ideas to the market. I'm Kim DeGrosse, the Assistant Dean and Head of the Office of Career Services, the host of our program. In this episode, we will feature Victor Su, who is one of Poets and Quant's 2025 MBAs to watch, an incredible accomplishment. He is joined by Professor Mary Beth Furst, Clinical Professor of Marketing, who teaches core marketing courses and product innovation at both the undergraduate and graduate levels at the Smith School of Business. Together, they will discuss business ethics in the context of relevant case studies linked to AI implications around privacy and ethical data usage. We will also learn about Victor's experience in the 32nd annual Fisher Case competition with Bath & Body Works, where the challenge focused on integrating AI into their business model. Thank you both for joining us today. Happy to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Professor Furst, I'll start with you. If you could just share with the audience why you nominated Victor for this awesome Poets and Quants recognition.
Oh, I have been fortunate to have Victor in a couple of classes, and he's a real connector in the classroom. So all of the classes that we teach at the master's level, well, undergraduate too, all have team projects. And this is the chance to work out in the classroom what real life will be like in the business world. So I've always been impressed by Victor's ability to connect people, to connect ideas across different classes. I've had him both in a brand management class as well as an ethics class. So I get to see, different sides of him and lots of different experiences that he's had. So he's a natural choice.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I met Victor a year ago when I started, and he was leading the MBA student organization and was pulling everybody together to make sure that your peers had the opportunities to be involved and be in front of recruiters. Maybe, Victor, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose the Smith Business School.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you, Professor Mary Beth. So I'm a current student, dual degree student in MBA and also Master Science in Marketing Analytics, set to just graduate in a couple weeks in December. So congrats to that. After spending some time in undergrad in Boston University, about 5 years after I graduated, I decided to come to Smith to do a career pivot, so to say. So I dabbled in a bunch of variety of industry that taught me a breadth of what it is like to be in consulting, marketing, but also in entertainment and media. That was definitely a fun piece and experience to be in. But what Smith has really taught me is when I was looking at different business schools, there are three criteria I was looking for: curriculum, and career and community. So these are the three categories that I was looking into. And Smith has really touched on all three categories, right? So, and what really surprised me also is the community aspect of it, which I really, really love. It's truly what sets my experience apart from other, friends who are also in business school, because your community is your best support, right? And that's truly how I felt when I have so many deadlines going on, so many things going on, because business school is hard, right? Especially MBA. Having your friends there to support and help you is definitely the greatest feedback and inspiration there is.
Oh, That's awesome. It sounds like you've had a great time here.
Absolutely, yes.
And when we think about the curriculum aspect of it, AI is the hot topic.
It is.
Right? Can you share a little bit about how AI was integrated into your curriculum and how that led to your case study?
Yeah, so AI is changing, right, in this world. And like the curriculum, it is also adapting into the current climate of AI and technology. So I was able to take several classes in AI that the school has to offer. So the first one being Foundations in AI, taught by Professor Balaji. He also taught the AI in business strategy too, and I also took that. So those classes really set the foundation of what, going back to what AI is before ChatGPT and every one of these advanced tools that we have now, and then really how to incorporate AI strategy in a business world in that AI and business strategy class. And right now, I'm also taking marketing in the age of AI. So what's really exciting is that we're actually going to build an app as a project for the class, and we don't really have any prior intense technical programming experiences, but nowadays with so many tools out there, we can just vibe code it and then use Cursor or something like that to really help us with the technical aspect. We just really have to have like the creativity and also the strategy behind what we're trying to create. So really the barrier to entry is really just for everyone who's willing to put themselves out there.
You use this term vibe coding. That sounds kind of technical to me. For somebody who doesn't have technical, share with the audience about vibe coding.
So I think it's also new to me too.
Okay.
But it's essentially for some using AI tools to help you program or code an app, for example. So rather than really, burying your head in the computer and figure out or debugging some technical aspect of it, you can really use AI to facilitate that process. Yeah.
Is that an assignment you gave him?
No, it isn't. But I think it's kind of interesting to see how this sort of little d democratization of how you can do lots of things now because AI is available. The assignment that we had in class was to look at prompt engineering and then prompt tuning, and then do a bit of a reflection on, what did you learn from that experience? You were intentionally asking hypothetical and biased prompts to see how the answers would compare with the more realistic and unbiased. Maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of what you found with that kind of experience.
I think what we have to do with AI really is to be intentional about it, right? And we also have to have the critical thinking aspect of it to really decipher whether the output of the AI is really making sense, because even though it's changing and improving every time, AI can still hallucinate. That's like the technical term that people give. So you really have to decipher what makes sense and what doesn't. And what we found from the exercise that Professor gave out was you really have to be specific, in the prompt that you're given. For example, if you're solving a business case, you might have to add in a lot of the different stakeholders, for example, and how that decision or route can impact others around you. Because in a business world, we really do have to consider all sides of the aspect and really see from the big picture, not just like the tiny details. Yeah. On top of it.
Yeah, one of the things that came out of that assignment, reading your submissions and the others in the class, was if you didn't explicitly ask for a stakeholder group, the AI may have missed it. The LLM will have missed it and not talked about that specific stakeholder point of view.
Yeah.
So it really is the best phrase I think I saw, probably from your submission, was that it's a partner.
The
LLM can be a partner. It is not there to solve for you. You still have to be able to assess and to evaluate and to think about a broader perspective. How will you see that? Like, you've done this case study.
Yeah.
How would you expect that to show up at work too?
So I think like using AI to integrate within your work, right, is incredibly like helpful and important. AI is not going to go anywhere, but from my classes as well, that the professors have taught me is like we really encourage you guys to use AI responsibly, right? You can't just take whatever it is and take it at face value. We are going to be the next generation of leaders who are not going to be replaced by AI, but we need to learn how to use it to really, improve upon our skill set, because this is just as technical and complicated and it's evolving every day. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about case studies. Why don't you share with our audience about the case study?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That you did.
So it was a Fisher Case Invitational by the Ohio State University Fisher School of Business. So me and my team, comprised of 4 other people, we were invited and selected by the school to represent Smith, and the client company is Bath and Body Works. So like the many other companies that they're also kind of exploring, is how they're navigating AI into their system, and how do we, for example, how do you get more willingness to pay from consumers, and how do you really use data ethically and responsibly. So our team was in charge of taking care of that business problem, and it was definitely a learning experience, because that was actually my first case competition that I attended, and it was definitely really challenging, but such a fruitful experience, because we only had a day to complete the whole thing. We got there in the morning, the case was given to us, and then by 8 a.m. the next morning, we do have to present to the executives of Bath and Body Works. So we basically didn't sleep the whole night, stayed out all night to just prepare, and then rehearse, and then drill it over and over again.
That's a good real world experience. When
Absolutely.
I was back in industry, that was kind of like, okay, here's the biggest presentation of your life, and you need to do it, tomorrow. So just being able to kind of do that. What did you find in terms of, especially because you're working as a team, and given how close the cohort is here at Maryland, you probably knew these folks really well.
Yes.
Yeah. How did you lean on each other? Or how did you help each other and support each other as you developed the responses?
Yeah, I think working in that team was one of the best experience I ever had, because we knew each other pretty well, but it was also our first time all 4 of us were working on, such a intensive business problem, right? So just like shouting out to my team members, Anna and Dakun, Aruna, we all complemented each other so well, because we came from different backgrounds. Yeah. So me and another teammate, we were really focused on the strategy and creative aspect of it. Me and Aruna were in charge of that. And some of the more technical, quantitative person, like Anna or Dakun, they are really in charge of, the analytics, and really diving down into like the numbers and the nitty-gritty details of it. So we do have quantitative technical people on our team, but also the strategy and creative aspect of it. So that's what makes it blended so well.
And you really had to lean on each other with the strengths that everybody brought to the table. But there's a lot of trust there, especially when it comes down to such a short time frame, where, if you've got, all right, you got 24 hours, let's put this thing together.
Yeah.
That's pretty stressful. How did you and the team respond to that stress?
We have it down to science, I feel
Did
like,
you?
almost.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like we literally blocked out the entire 24 hours. Like, okay, for example, 9 a.m. to 11, we have to brainstorm. And then after like a break, from 1 to 3, we have to do some deeper dive into it. And by the evening time, we're already working on the presentation aspect of it. And then throughout the nights, rehearsing and doing any final touches. So we did have like a schedule, and then we follow strictly on that. And then it's really tempting to see what other people are doing, but then it's, at that time, you really don't have any time to waste, right? So we really had to lock in, how I say it, and then just really focus on what we're working on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You could sleep when it's over. But
yeah, exactly.
Let's get it done, right?
But not gonna lie, I feel like that case competition experience took like 10 years off my life because it really was so stressful. It was like, oh wow, like this is now or never. But definitely such a good experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, the organizational skills, the teamwork skills.
Yes.
Did you use any AI in the process of developing your responses?
No, actually. So we did use, not completely, I'd say. Yeah, we did use AI to kind of just help us guide us to be on the right track. Yeah. So we have all the ideas that we talked about and brainstormed with each other, and we just kind of took feedback from what ChatGPT has been, saying, and be like, okay, is this on the right track? And then if it's also if the AI wasn't making sense, we'd go, okay, let's regroup and just see how we can take it from there. But we use it minimally, I have to say, very minimally. Just kind of be like, okay, what are some other ideas and things that we can build upon what we already have. Yeah.
So it's definitely your ideas, and then you get ChatGPT is kind of like that willing extra participant who's going to give you a little feedback.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
And again, if you ask the right questions, then you get good answers
yes,
back.
Yes.
That's always one of the challenges.
And now it's actually, I think, becoming even more advanced. Like when we were using it, it was like only last year, but then now has evolved into something more like yes, prompt tuning is very important, but then it's also learning on itself, right? So in the future, maybe if based on your past history interacting with this specific chat box or AI agent, then it may already learn your pattern of thinking. So those type of prompt engineering specifically to your case may not be that necessary to a point that it already knows what you're trying to say. Yeah. So that's kind of like the scary part, right? Because people may be, overly reliant on it. So this is why it's still important to not be dependent on it. Yeah, I have to say.
It sounds like, too, the more you understand about where the LLMs have come from and how they have evolved, it seems like it also helps you prepare to use them better in the workplace. You know, like looking at cases where naively, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time that we should be able to, take all these photos and put them into our system.
Right,
and then,
Mm-hmm.
We can do visual searches on everybody in the world. Seemed like a good idea. But then there's so many ethical concerns with that.
Yes.
And it's almost kind of naive where it sounds like you're better prepared because you have more of this history and ability to look in the future.
Yeah. So I think it's looking through it through different lenses, right? So, I mean, with, for example, that you just gave me, the principles of, ethics, like utilitarian or deontology still applies to the business world today, right? So if you're concerned about whether or not this initiative serves the greater good of the entire people, but maybe the way you go about it is, a little questionable, so to say. But on the other hand, you do have I would say personally, like a more stricter perspective on it. So if the intention is right, even though the consequence is good, but the way you go about it is unethical, then that's just, black and white, unethical issue. So I think it is a push and pull topic, right? A debate whether or not how to use AI responsibly. But then on the other hand, I do think that we did take this IBM certification as part of a course on understanding the 5 pillars of ethics. So it's, fairness, robustness, privacy, transparency, and explainability. So these 5 pillars are just, the foundations of how we should look into these AI models. Yeah. So we know and how to discern the differences. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's allowed, I'd like to give a shout out to IBM for doing this because they made their skill builder platform available to us. And this is something that professionals in the workforce are using to scale up their skills. Using it in the classroom setting really gives us sort of a level set, and everybody then walks in with the same kind of knowledge and background. And then it helped, or at least I'm thinking it was probably integral. You had to create then a data project.
Yes.
Kind of applying, these, just making sure that you did things within the realms of an ethical perspective.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you did your project?
So the project is it's fictional, right? But it can be like a proposal given to a larger company. So what my group did was we took existing data. So we're not actually collecting any new information or anything like that. So we're utilizing already existing data from this company that we are fictionally working with. And then we are using AI and their data, purchase history, for example, to give out personalized recommendations and discounts, for example, to customers by segmentation. So whether it's discount lapsed customers or family customers or individual consumers, we will utilize, for example, push notifications for discounts to specific towards these customer segments. And because right now the company that we are working for fictitiously is only sending out generalized promotions. So I think this specific promotion types will definitely attract more consumers in the space. And the ethical part of it is that we're not, taking any new information. We're only taking existing data that consumers have consented to, whether it's by ordering on an app with the opt-in, opt-out selection. Yeah, so this is definitely something new that we're working with, and it's very relevant.
And that's why we did the assignment was, I open the class and we talk about, here are the companies that didn't do this.
Yeah.
They didn't run their data project in an ethical way. And, let's see if we can avoid being on the front page of some newspaper because of this. How do you plan?
Yes.
And you have several missions that you have to achieve. The focus was to expand the business for the organization, whatever the organization was. So, are you doing product development or market development, or are you doing market penetration, trying to get the same people to make more purchases? All of those things are valid ways to grow the business. And now how are you going to do it, either with the data you've already collected, new data you need to collect, the value of AI in all of this, but also how do you do it so that you don't look like one of these seminal cases that we put up on the
headline companies,
right,
for
yes,
example.
exactly. Yeah. Here's how not to do it. Yeah.
I do actually really enjoy the last piece of this whole project, because we've been working on our own project for the entire term without really knowing what other groups are doing. So what the professor did was we had the whole class acted like an ethics review board. So we get to nitpick and pick their brains at the other groups to see how they're doing on their ethical AI usage, or how the data is being used. And while we're presenting, we do have to take into consideration of all these aspects leading up to it. And I think that was just learning about other groups is also definitely what's the big takeaway from here. Yeah, because what you worked on is not necessarily the same as other groups.
This season, during each episode, we'll have a segment featuring the esteemed AI expert and director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Business at the Smith School, Balaji Padmanabhan, that highlights the role of AI on the topics discussed.
I've been involved with technology for a long time, and I've said this many times. It almost always feels that the bad guys use it better than the good guys, particularly whenever we have very powerful technologies. But then, if you step back and think about it, or when I did, it's not about the bad guys or the good guys. It's about whoever has the greatest return on investment. So if there is a way for someone to purpose a technology such that it adds value for them, that's exactly what will happen. A few years ago, I was at a conference where I saw an interesting demo. So this was an AI tool that was talking and calling consumers who had outstanding loans. The AI tool was making incredible calls. The way it was screaming at consumers who didn't pay back was scary when I listened to some of the conversations, but it worked. Apparently, the firm that was piloting it saw a huge uptick in collections when AI called people. Now, this was not in the United States, but it does raise the question of ethics. When it comes to AI and ethics, it's a very crazy world out there for all the reasons you might expect. In science, we have scientific laws like gravity. You drop an apple, it falls on the ground. You drop anything else, it still falls on the ground. Ethics, unfortunately, even for humans, is not like gravity. Ethics has to be learned, we have to work at it, and we have to make sure that we consciously do things. Left alone, the closest to gravity in the business world tends to be value creation. If there's value that can be created, and oftentimes if there's money to be made, people will make money, right? And there's nothing bad about it, but that's how value creation has often worked. So where does ethics come in? Ethics is about doing the right thing, and humans over centuries have learned that this is hard, but it's important, right? And it's important for us to do the right thing. AI doesn't understand ethics. The closest to what's going on in the AI space is this thing called alignment, and where the idea is to build AI systems that can align with values. And if you step back and look at the ecosystem, there are 4 types of groups or entities that have to do different things. There are societies who have to look at AI ethics and think about, how do they want to come up with frameworks that can make sure that AI that we build does the right things. There are platforms, tech companies that are building these AI tools that have to think about how to build ethical AI, what guardrails that they need to put in place. There are businesses who use AI, who build their own AIs as well, who have to be asking the same question, right? What is their use of AI? How can they make it ethical as well as one that conforms to their values? And finally, there are consumers, people like us, who have to make everyday decisions about what's right and what's wrong when it comes to the use of AI in our daily lives.
What would you say is the biggest surprise that came out of all of this for you?
First of all, how creative, people are with data, and usage, but also how to consider the overall big picture of it, because we'd spent so much time on stakeholder analysis, right? You do have, while you can't really please everyone realistically, but then how do you mitigate some of the groups that may be more impacted, so to say? And I think another big piece of it is corporate social responsibility, right? We talk about SDG goals, and we also analyze some of the companies' SDG goals that we are, targeting to. And that was definitely put into perspective on how well some of these companies are doing in terms of these goals, but what are some improvements that we can suggest as part of the project?
The project that you did for the case study, do you think there was any tangible financial impact to the company based on your recommendations, either in hours or direct dollars, or anything that you would think that a company would take away as a business gain from the project that you shared with them?
We weren't given any data set to work with, for example, but implementation of these AI models and having a whole department of engineers, AI engineers, definitely a cost consideration for these companies, right? But then these considerations can be seen definitely as an investment, because only then you are able to take your production and efficiency to the max. So it's only going to be exponentially rising how you're able to take away from this foundational setup of AI systems that you're incorporating. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of companies, I'm approached often, both at the undergraduate and the master's level, to have companies come in and they want to present to students and they want to hear how students would tackle a particular problem. We've had such a wide range of companies, but everyone has come in and been like, okay, this is the thing we've been struggling with. And there's always that aha moment of the students like, what'd you think about this? And they're like, actually, no, we didn't. That's a really good point. And it's, again, because the students can articulate a different stakeholder point of view. And they have a different set of experiences. And depending on the size of the company, if they've been doing lots of milling around with this idea with the same group of people, you got a lot of groupthink going on. So how do you broaden who is at the table and who has ideas?
Yeah.
And, certainly that's what's so fun about watching the presentations, because everybody picks these different companies.
Yeah.
Vastly different, and how they tackle the problems. So.
And I think it's one thing to just have your students or your student or my classmates offer their ideas, but it's also about offering a new perspective, because like different classes have different age demographics too. Like I learned also so much about the younger people who are in other programs, like the +1 programs. They tend to skew like demographically a little younger, while I am a little more experienced in a work field, right? So it's definitely learning from younger people who are more well versed in this technology and more exposed to these kind of information, definitely, because I don't want to say like an age gap or anything like that, or like a generational difference,
That's funny.
right? But I want to say that it's really taking in what some other people have to say and really learning from it. Yeah.
It's so pulling on that thread a little bit, since we know each other both from a full-time MBA branding class, and then also a Master's of Science in Marketing Analytics class, which is pulls to the younger students, as you say. Could you compare the two? And not very many students decide to do both programs. Could you talk a little bit about your reason for wanting to do both, and then how they complemented one another?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason for me to do a dual degree is because, both programs are STEM designated, right? So we do have a lot of, quantitative aspect in both programs. But from me, who came from a undergraduate background of hospitality administration, which is a subset of the business world, but I didn't really have that technical aspect of it. So the MBA is really, really there to get me that business acumen. And the marketing analytics part is really to get that technical hands-on portion of it. So we do a lot of, coding, data science classes. We learn how to use R, Python, when we're now getting Google Analytics certified in one of our classes. So it's definitely quantitative and hands-on. So I really want to get that technical experience, because the career pivot I'm going to be in is product management and product marketing. So these two areas do need a blend of both, right? So on the job, you're really addressing to multitude of stakeholders and also other departments. It's that connector piece. You're really the bridge between the different departments and how to convey the business initiative. But on the same time, the technical background is what gives that understanding of what for example, the engineering department is trying to do. And you're trying to decipher what they are trying to tell you, and then translating that to the executives and stuff like that. So, having the blend, a best of both worlds, is really what I'm looking for.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So as we close it out today, I think to myself, given that there's an unusual combination, like describe your dream job, given that, right?
Yeah.
Like what does that mean? What does that look like?
So I think really relating to what Professor said, I think I really found my innate talent, I guess, is to really be a connector. From my time in the Smith School as being the president of the MBA Association as well, I really find joy, in really learning about other people and being the bridge, and just helping out other people in a community that I'm really passionate about. So in a dream job, I would really love to be a product manager and transitioning into that, solving for a business problem that has an impact, and also really bringing multitude of people together to be a team and really solve this problem and work together is really what I'm striving for.
I love that, Victor. We know that our Smith students help solve real world business problems.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it was just so exciting to have you, Victor, Professor Mary Beth Furst, with us today. We appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing your experiences with our audience. Till next time on Smith's Got Talent.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you. To learn more about how to hire our students that can innovate in your business, please email us at smithocs-ae@umd.edu. Again, that's SMITHOCS-AE@umd.edu.